Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott. One of the things that photographers have been harping on Canon for a while has been how that Nikon and particularly Sony have outstripped Canon when it comes to the dynamic range. And so when Canon promised some pretty significant improvements with the new Canon 80D APS-C or crop sensor camera, that's DX for those of you that are Nikon shooters, it certainly piqued my interest. And so one of the things I've tested for during my review period is to find out how well it actually does compared to both the previous generation 70D as well as the EOS M3, which has a similar 24 megapixel sensor. And so how does it hold up when trying to recover shadows or recover highlights? Now, first of all, my experience says, and I've certainly continued to find this to be true, that Canon cameras are better at recovering shadows than they are at recovering highlights. And so as I begin to run my test, while there is a slight bit of improvement in highlight recovery, I found that the greatest advantage comes in shadow recovery. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to interactively look at a series of photos shot in the exact same setting and in roughly similar light. I shot them within minutes of each other, and while it was coming towards sundown and the light was fading, I have done my best to get fairly equal results to begin with. And so we're going to interactively jump in and take a look and see what happens when we try to recover shadows and highlights with this. So what I've done is I have used the 80D, the 70D, and then the Canon EOS M3, which I felt has had the best APS-C sensor that Canon has produced to this point. And so we'll see how it compares. Now, first of all, just looking at a kind of a standard balanced exposure here, what I've done is I've bracketed exposures. And so here we see that this is kind of a generic exposure. And so if we do a little processing to tweak for pulling down highlights and pulling up some shadows and just generally increasing contrast, we see that we can get a nice result here. And not surprising, because the sky wasn't extreme. We haven't really have any kind of blown out areas in the sky, and we're able to produce a balanced image. But the same really is true if we go and we take a look at, for example, the same kind of image from the 70D. And once again, we see that we've achieved pretty much the same result here. Shadows look good and highlights are still preserved. And so the point being, of course, that if you shoot properly, you can still retain a nice image overall with any of these cameras, really. And similarly, the light was a little bit more faded here, and so with the M3 we've got a little bit darker overall exposure, but once again our highlights look fine here and our shadow information is fine. So no surprise there. That's not really the situations that's going to concern you. Now, just to quickly look here, while it's not surprising to me that the major stride here has not been in recovering highlights, that's not necessarily a Canon strength in my opinion. And so here we see this is a 3-stop blown out or overexposed image, and with some processing we can make it look decent in this section, but there isn't anything to bring back here in the sky. That's gone, and you can see here, particularly in the snow, that the definition in the snow is gone. And so I would say that as I look at the similar image taken with the 70D, that the end result is the same. The sky wasn't quite the same, so we see a little bit more shadow here in terms of the clouds as they were moving through, but kind of an unnatural look here amongst the trees, so it's not quite as clean. But what we can tell here is that the snow is blown out and not retrievable. The same was true of the M3's image as well. But more interesting is if we jump in now at a 3-stop underexposed image, to where obviously our shadows are really crushed here and dark. And so let's see what we can do in retrieving this image. Now, I want you to know that I've used the same processing steps with all of these images, and so that we get same type result, just a slight tweak with the M3 that I'll explain in a moment. So what that means is I've brought back exposure 1.5 stops. I've brought the highlights down 100%, brought the shadows up 100%, and then done a little bit of tweaking with the white and black channels here in Lightroom, and so that we can get the best result possible here. Now, but that's all I've done. Nothing in Photoshop. This is something that's easily accomplishable. So let's take a look at the shadow information. So we see, number one, that our shadows really here look quite good. They're still nice and black, not a lot of noise that's there. And along the front of the building, we're seeing no color banding, no green look, and in the same as this building back here. So if that doesn't impress you, why don't we take a look at the last generation, at the 70D. And so here we see a similar image that I would say has a little bit more light to begin with. You can see there was a little more light breaking through the clouds. Still, even with that advantage, if we go into a pixel level, we see a much different story. A lot of shadow noise here. Along the front of the building, you can see a fair bit of green and magenta color noise, banding that's taking place here where the shadows have been recovered. Even here on the roof, there is some of that information along with in the building behind, and even in the trees themselves, you see that kind of noise information. And so just a quick head-to-head type comparison. Let's take a look here between these two images. And so it's very easy to tell a huge difference here. Look at the difference in the cleanness of the shadow information, the cleanness of this roof in terms of not having coloration. And now at the front of the building, you can see a dramatically different result in that the color has stayed proper here, while on the 70D, it's not only noisier, it's also full of color information that's been added in retrieving those shadows. And likewise on this rear building, you see how much cleaner the textures look and how that color noise simply isn't there. And so if we were to throw into the mix and take a look now at the result from the M3. Now the M3 also has a 24 megapixel sensor, and so it's closer to the sensor here, but we can see that as we look at this shadow information, there's definitely some more noise here in the shadow itself, not quite as clean looking, and just a little bit of, just a hint of green and magenta banding, but not nearly as bad as the 70D result, and likewise here. And so if we were to compare that with the result from the 70D, we could say, okay, there's already been some significant improvements that have been made, and so you can see that the image from the 70D is just much noisier. But we would see, if we were to compare now with the result from the 80D, we're going to find that the information here is just, it's that much cleaner going to the 70D. At this rear building, you can see a little bit of color banding that's simply not there on the image from the 70D. We haven't had to recover quite as much because the light was a little bit different, but still overall we can see just a more natural result here in the 80D's result, and none of that color banding. And right in this area you can see that the texture information is accurate, it's good, and there's just a notable difference here in the shadow recovery. And so we can see definitely that the 80D has made strides in shadow recovery, significant strides, particularly over the previous generation 70D. And so just a general tip, if you're shooting, remember that highlights are harder to recover than shadows are, and so shoot accordingly. So as you can see, while there hasn't been a massive advancement when it comes to recovering highlights, there certainly has been a huge difference made in the ability to recover shadow information. And so certainly my recommendation would be that if you're going to shoot in the future and you're shooting a scene that you would like to get in one exposure, if you're shooting raw, don't hesitate to underexpose a little bit, because you're going to be able to pull back those shadows, and if you leave enough information in the sky, you'll be able to have a nice sky that still has definition, but also be able to cleanly recover those shadows, and so you get a nicely balanced image out of it. So in this case, I would say that Canon's claims certainly are valid, and whether or not they're up to the level of what Sony is at, I can't speak for, but I certainly can see a vast improvement, particularly from the previous generation 70D, in the ability to cleanly recover shadows. I'm Dustin Abbott. If you haven't already, Please subscribe. Also, you can follow me on social media and sign up for my newsletter. There's a link down below. Check out my website, dustinabbott.net. There's a lot of great reviews, camera tips, photography things that are there. Thanks for watching today. Have a great day.